free and open source software, FOSS. And this is software that is both free software and open source software, where anyone is freely licensed to use, copy, study, and change the software in any way. And the source code is openly shared so that people are encouraged to voluntarily improve the design of the software. And just like we've mentioned, the OSI's definition of open source software is free. And that's in the sense of giving freedom to those who use it. So in the most common way of thinking, where free means no upfront cost to use, modify, or distribute, the answer is yes. The software is free. And free software refers to the free software definition, open source. Terms FOSS and FLOSS are used to refer to software that is licensed under the license at the FSF. And Google doesn't call itself an open source company, and rightly so, because open source is simply part of its strategy for distributing software that will help it sell more advertising. Hey, my name is Ian Hillman. Feel free to like or subscribe. Let's get back to open source. And open source components means that the open source freeware, shareware, or other software having similar licensing or distribution models by which it is subject to license agreement or other enforceable requirements or restrictions, including under the NUG, the GNU, General Public License, or GNU, GNU Library, or Lesser Public License. There's all different types, and open source is usually shared on a public repository and shared publicly, and anyone can access the repository to use the code independently or contribute improvements to the design, to the functionality of the overall project. And OSS usually comes with a distribution license. And Wikipedia, free internet-based encyclopedia, this started like in 2001, that operates under an open source management style. It's overseen by the nonprofit Wikimedia Foundation, and Wikipedia uses a collaborative software known as Wiki that facilitates the creation and development of articles. And Facebook's open source platform has been growing steadily since it was launched, and it's showing really no signs of its popularity, waning in anytime soon. And the past years have really seen the project expand yet again, reaching close to 1.3 million followers on GitHub. And no, open source software certainly does have the potential to be more secure than its closed source counterpart. But make no mistake, simply being open source is no guarantee of security. It's simply unrealistic to depend on secrecy for security, especially in computer software. And open source is encouraging a license, that has innovation through collaboration. If we didn't have this, many of the technologies that we have today would have never been developed. They'll be locked away behind patent laws. And the open source movement is the reason that technology has developed in such a breakneck pace for the past few decades. Even Android is an open source operating system for mobile devices, and it's a corresponding open source project that's led by Google. And you'll find Apple's iOS is considered closed source, where Google's Android is open source, and each has its own benefits and its issues. And if we look at the networking of open source, or open source network is a new generation network that offers you programmable customization service, centralized unified management, dynamic traffic monitoring, and automated deployment. It makes the transformation of the data center architecture change to virtualization and automation. So when a software program is open source, it means that the program source code is freely available to the public. So if we look at an OS, an operating system, it's a software that communicates with the hardware and allows other programs to run. And if we look at an open source library, is any library with an open source license, which denotes software that is free to reuse, free to modify, and or publish without permission. You find Java is open source because it has a version in which you can download its compiler. So let's first be clear. When we say an application is open source, it means that the distributor has the source code of the application for public access. You'll see PHP is an open source scripting language that's widely used for web development, and it can be embedded into HTML, but it's available as open source. And who would be the owner in those cases? You'll find typically the open source projects, the creator owns the software and provides the license to other contributors to reproduce, modify, and redistribute the software. And the licenses that are offered to the contributors are usually standardized, things like MIT, GNU, LPGL, and Apache. These are some of the examples. And open source research exhausts any publicly available information, including the internet, social media, books, periodicals, databases, and foreign language based content. And Python is an OSI, open source license, that's freely usable or distributable, just like PHP. You can use it even for commercial use, Python. Its license is administered by the Python Software Foundation. A great advantage of OSS is freedom to use. Anyone can download, modify the source code to change or upgrade, to redistribute it without any restrictions, and it can also be incorporated into another program to perform new functions. And the good thing is that there's no licensing fees. And in closing, give you a few examples. We have Firefox, Chrome, OpenOffice, Linux, Android. These are some of the popular ones of examples of open source software, and you'll find that Microsoft Windows is probably the most popular piece of closed source software that's out there. And that brings us to the end. Thank you for listening. My name is Ian Hillman. Comment, rate, and subscribe, and see you in the next video.